class for you today that breaks down a specific area of poses that the wheel gives us a little bit of assistance with, and that's inversions. In addition to the wheel, I'm going to use a yoga block for a couple of things. You can make do without, but if you have one, I would go ahead and have that handy. And I would recommend for sure before you do this particular wheel class that you have done my strength building wheel practice, because a lot of those things will help you get some skills necessary to successfully try to work on your inversions. So that being said, we are going to do some warming up first. We're not just going to pop right up into a handstand or anything. So we're going to warm up the shoulders first. So sit down on one end of your mat, and you'll see I'm obviously next to the wall, so we're going to use the wall for safety and comfort. Okay, so sitting on your heels, hands on the wheel, roll forward. Right, and as you roll forward, make sure that the wheel is underneath your hands and not your wrist, and then roll back, and it's kind of fingertips on the down slope, and then roll back and forth a few times. And then from here, going to do a little cat-cow movement with the hands on top of the wheel. All right, so as we inhale, we'll let the chest go down toward the mat and sort of look forward a bit. Exhale, rounding upward, and we're pressing firmly down into that wheel the whole time. So this cat-cow variation also gives us a little bit of interesting sensation in the shoulders. Into like a wide-legged child's pose position. Roll the wheel all the way up against you, and then drape over it. Take your hands down slightly forward of your knees, and we'll roll forward, and you can lightly tap your head to the mat, and then push back. Keep looking down at your wheel. Rocking back and forth a few times. Should feel pretty nice. Okay. From here, we're going to do one of the exercises that I featured in the strength building wheel class, because it's going to again tie into some of the inversions that we're going to practice, and it'll help us get a little bit more warmed up through the core and the arms. So we're going to try a plank on our hands, and we're going to get set up to where in that plank we've got our ankles, feet ish on top of the wheel. Sometimes it takes a little bit of experimentation and adjusting to get the right placement. All right, so get your hands about shoulder width. All right, so from there, and again, with wheel stuff, we have to be just cautious and know that it can be squirrely, right? We're gonna pike the hips up and roll the wheel forward and roll back. Let's try a few. Keep those arms really straight. Let's do one more.
you can take your knees down, and I'm gonna step off of the wheel. And then from here, we're going to try just a standing forward fold to work on just loosening up through the backs of the legs a little bit more and into more of a compressed shape where we are using the hip flexors to help us fold. So take the wheel behind your legs, feet are together. All right, and then you can bend your knees as much as you feel like you want to or need to. And we'll come into a forward fold, grabbing hold of the wheel. If you can grab on the far end, give that a go. And push legs into the wheel, push wheel into the legs. Okay, from here, we are going to do some similar work that we just did to what we just did with the plank and the pike rolls. But we're gonna try that with elbows down instead. And I'm gonna show you how to take that into our first true, quote unquote, inversion. A bound headstand, right? Elbows are down, fingers are interlaced, and we're kind of wrapping hands around the head. So, same idea to where we're in a forearm plank instead of a plank and piking the hips up. Instead of having palms flat, since we are going to attempt to go up into a headstand from there, let's go ahead and interlace the fingers here. And then when you're ready to put your head down, you can keep your fingers interlaced and just kind of open the palms a little bit to take the top of your head down in between your hands. There goes the wheel. Okay, so make sure that you're close enough to the wall where you feel like you feel safe, right? So you don't want to be so far where you feel like you're going to tumble too much, but not right up against it. Okay, so we'll try those pike rolls first, which are pretty hard, and the wheel gets squirrely. Harder still when the wheel gets squirrely. Okay, come on, wheel. Rolling up. And maybe you want to try that with your head down. And you're wrapping your hands around, right? So to lift from there, the sort of first thing I would try is bend your knees into more of a tuck. And then if you feel like you could lift a foot and maybe a second foot, you could go up from there. Carefully. Right? So that helps us get the hips high enough up over the shoulders where we feel like we have some control in the lift upward, as opposed to just trying to kick up and not know what's happening up there. You could also try that same thing, which I'll do next, not pulling the knees in to bend, but lifting them straight, more of a pike lift instead of a tuck lift. Harder, right? Takes a little bit more core action. Okay, right, heads down, hands are wrapped behind the head, right, pike. Then maybe the feet can lift up. And you can try reversing that. let's take a moment to rest. From there, maybe a little shoulder movement. And all of those possibilities, all of those variations for getting up are not just about strength, right? About being able to have enough flexibility through your shoulders, hip flexor strength, hamstring flexibility to get your hips back. Lots of stuff is involved with that. But I find that fairly helpful to get the feel of placement. So you could then do your headstand instead of rolling the wheel in, using the wheel as a little extra help to sort of press against at the wall. So you won't be able to interlace your fingers. You can just kind of grab the wheel, take the top of your head down right in front of the wheel, and then sort of press the back of your head wherever it touches up against the wheel. And you can try those same types of lifting and see if you've learned anything from those last couple of things. All right, so get close enough where you can feel the back of your head pushing against the wheel. The top of your head is down, right? Elbows are down. Right, you can, pretend that you're rolling, but really you're walking in, and you can try that tuck. Or if you want to try your pike, try to come down with control, send those hips back. All right, let's take a moment to rest. Okay, so the next inversion we're going to work on from there is forearm stand, aka feathered peacock, pincha, mayurasana. That's a fun name, right? So in a way, right, it's very similar to what we just did because we've got our elbows down. However, the head's not on the mat, so it's harder, right? Because you're not using that as an extra point of contact to help you lift. However, the way that we're going to use the wheel is definitely helpful. It gives us, again, an extra point of contact to press into as it presses into the wall. And there's lots of different ways you can practice all these inversions with the wheel. These are just the ones that I think are friendliest and most helpful, at least in my own personal experience. So, kind of similar to what we just did with our headstand, the wheel against the wall. However, we're going to get into like a dolphin-like shape, right? Elbows down, and instead of just grabbing the wheel, we're going to take the L fingers, index fingers, and thumbs inside the wheel and have the other fingers just sort of spread out to the mat. And then we'll walk up into the wheel until we feel it's going to be more the back of the neck and the upper back, upper part of the shoulder area there, because we're higher up, because the head is lifted. So that's an important distinction there, right? The head is not on the mat, the head is lifted. And like I said, it's harder, right? Because we're just really using core, including the hip flexors to help us lift up. Shoulders, obviously. So there probably won't be as not that the headstand was easy, but it's, like I said, it's going to be harder to lift. I'm going to show you the way that I like to do it, which is one leg at a time. It's still not a kick, it's a lift. So there's a distinction there too. And you may not be quite there to lift all the way, but eventually working through that strength building video and just practicing setup and how you get into it, you'll get there eventually. So I'm gonna go ahead and get set up.
L fingers in the wheel, other fingers spread out. Right now I've got the back of my head against the wheel. My head is not touching the floor. All right, I'll lift up into like a dolphin shape, and I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna keep walking into the wheel until I feel my upper back pressing into it, right? And I'm trying to push my hips up as high as I can, right? Heads moving around, right? It's not on the mat, right? If I were a little bit stronger than I am, maybe one day I'll be able to lift both legs at once, but I can't do that quite yet. So I'll do one leg, and I'll try to use that leg lifting up to help my other foot pop up. And then I can slowly take that other leg up. And then I'll come down the way I came, and I'll try starting with the opposite leg this time. To try a variation, take your feet to the wall, take your hips to the wall, hollow back, right? A back bend and forearm stand, and you can kind of push your head a little further off the wheel, kind of snuggle down. That gets pretty tiring with the head elevated. Let's come on down. Take a rest.
Alright, so I always feel that particular inversion a lot in the shoulders, right? Both strength-wise and flexibility-wise. Really both aspects of that are important to be able to get up successfully. All right, so next one we're going to work on is handstand, which kind of with all of these inversions, I used to be really into working on them pre-wheel, and then I sort of fell out of that practice a lot. I don't really practice them without the wheel very much anymore, but once I discovered them with the wheel, it was like a whole new world. And handstand is really one of my very favorite things to do with the wheel, even though I hardly ever practice it without. I think it's really fun. So I'm going to show you a few different ways you can approach handstand. We're going to be pressing the top of the head into the wheel, right? So kind of similar to headstand in a way. Your head pressing down is going to be that extra point of contact to help you go up, and the wheel is pressing against the wall. So let's get set up. So typically, most people without a wheel, if they're going to use the wall and kind of kick up, they're going to lift one leg and then kick up, right? And a lot of times we fling and flail and don't really have a whole lot of control with that. So having that extra point of contact helps us have a little bit more control. So my hands are shoulder width, and they're just slightly forward of the wheel, right? Placement makes a big difference. So if it's not happening, you might just kind of check in there and make sure placement is right. One little tweak of ½ inch might make a difference.
Okay, so let's try the one leg kick to start. Make sure your hands aren't too wide. Top of the head's down on the wheel. Okay? So we'll take one leg up, and we're going to bend the opposite knee and kick. And we'll try a few. And maybe we stick, and maybe we don't. And then if you could stay up, you can take the other leg up, press down firmly, breathe. it's a good idea to practice both legs because we always have a dominant side. So that's one way, right? Make sure you breathe. You'll notice that I was trying not to be in like a huge hurry to necessarily go all the way up right away. And I didn't smack the wall with my feet. If you are smacking the wall with your feet, there's not a whole lot of control that you're exhibiting, right? So take it down a notch. Think about where your hips need to go. Hips over shoulders, right? Think about those pike lifts we were working on. Once you get your hips over your shoulders, the distribution of weight is going to be easier for you to lift up. Okay, so I'm going to show you another way to jump up into a handstand. This is my favorite. This is the tuck jump. I don't know why it's my favorite, but it just is. I think it's a lot of fun. So instead of doing one leg at a time, we're gonna jump up both legs at a time, but with knees bent, kind of hugging them in toward the torso. Your hips still have to go back, right? Because you have to counterbalance the weight of your legs that are out in front of you. Okay, same setup, right? Make sure the hands aren't too wide, shoulder width. Top of the head presses down. Hands are just forward of the wheel. And for this one, right, walk in, right? Already thinking about where those hips need to go, right? And you can just do a little bit of like pulsing there and lifting the hips. And then when you're ready, you can bend your knees and try kicking up. Hug it, tuck it. And then maybe lift from there. Yeah. It took me a long time to get that in particular. Once I did, I was kind of addicted. If you start to get the hang of the tuck jumps, and I haven't done a whole lot of this, but I thought, well, I may as well give it a go and see what happens. So kind of similar to when we did headstand, and I showed you the two different kinds of lifting with the bent knees and with the straight legs, tuck lift, pike lift. You might be able to, instead of jumping into a tuck with the knees pulled in, into a pike with the legs straight. Now, as I just mentioned, your hips have to go back in the opposite direction in order to counterbalance the legs coming forward, right? Because your legs are heavy, right? So I'll give it a go and see what happens. It's not always successful, like any of this stuff. All right, so as I jump, I'm going to bend my knees and then I'm going to see if I can straighten into a pike. And then up. And then you can kind of find that pike coming down, and you might try to separate your feet and try to bring your feet towards your wrists. That's another thing that is on my to-do list of stuff to work on, toe tap to the wrist. And that is where that idea of compression and folding and using the hip flexors definitely comes in.
All right, one more thing that I like to practice for handstand with the wheel is a puppy press. So this one's not a kick, so obviously it's a lot harder. It's a press up, a lift instead of jumping into it. I use the yoga block for a little bit of help to get a little bit lifted already with just my setup, my starting position before trying to lift all the way up. So it's called a puppy press. I don't know exactly why it has that name, puppy press. Maybe because, you know, a puppy is a baby, and it's just like a baby way to work on pressing up. So basically, I'm gonna have one foot on the block that's gonna help me kind of push my hips up higher. And I'm gonna take the other leg up with a bent knee, sort of out to the side, so that I can use this lifted leg to pull myself up instead of kicking, hopefully. We'll see how it goes. All right, and then I'm gonna make sure that block is not too far back, right? Because I wanna be able to get my hips higher up toward being over my shoulders. Same hand and head placement. Right foot on the block. All right, get that puppy leg going. Hips go up, float the leg off the block. And you can do like a tree handstand maybe for funsies, since that was the puppy shape. Okay, and I'm gonna try the other side. This one's harder for me. Not happening today, and that's okay, right? This stuff's hard, so don't wear yourself out. It's normal to get frustrated with these things, but you know, like anything that we practice, it takes time. So you've got lots of different variations that you can try. So we're gonna end with more of a supported, restful inversion, shoulder stand, using the wheel. So let's move the mat out from the wall a bit to have some room. And if you typically do not like shoulder stand, it's not my very favorite. This variation with the wheel is much friendlier. We're not actually going to get the hips all the way over the shoulders like we're normally trying to do in a regular shoulder stand, so it's much nicer, friendlier for the neck, etc. And if you have long arms, you're gonna wanna have your block handy. I have long arms, so I'm gonna use that. Okay, so make sure you're away from the wall a bit. Get down on the opposite end of your mats. Right, we're gonna bring the wheel behind us, right, and just sort of like get to where your shoulder blade area is against the wheel. When we roll back, it's gonna feel like, oh, I'm never gonna get down to the mat. Where's the mat? It's there. Promise. Have faith. Think about when you're in shoulder stand, right? The shoulders are on the mat and the back of the head is on the mat, right? So as we go back, we want to make sure that we keep the gaze forward so that the back of the head will land on the mat and we're not throwing the head back and making a weird angle with the neck, right? Hang onto your wheel with your hands, push into your feet, lift your hips and start to roll back. Gaze forward, chin down toward your chest. Keep going, you're gonna get down there eventually, I promise. As you start to lower down, your feet will lift. And then you can take your legs up. If you have long arms, again, grab your block so that you can keep your arms straight and pull into the wheel. And basically like the sacrum area is on the wheel and the toes are over the hips, right? The toes aren't coming back
over the head in this variation. Feels just nice, right? And this is always a nice way to kind of cool down and soothe after all the work we just did with those inversions. If you wanted to go into plow from there, you can just start to send your legs overhead, and then you can roll the wheel a little closer in. Or just stick with shoulder stand. Again, that was not my favorite, really. Okay. And then to come out, if you've got your block, you can just kind of move it away, set it aside. Bring your legs over, roll the wheel out, and roll down. Give your knees a hug and rock a little bit. Let's take the knees over to one side for a twist for just a little final bit of soothing. And take that twist to the other side. Go ahead and roll over to that side that you're on and press up. Whew. All right, so I hope that you learned some things. I hope that you had fun trying all this crazy stuff, right? It's hard. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of time, but the wheel gives us an extra way to think about all the little parts and pieces that go together into those inversions in order to have them be a little bit more successful. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to practicing with you again soon. Namaste.